Three, two, one. Hey, welcome to Back of the Pack, BOTP in the house. This is your race report from the back of the pack. This is what it's like to be slow and take a long time. I just have had the experience that all podcasts tend to interview the leaders, the people who win, the people who are on course for the shortest amount of time, the people who get there when all the aid stations are fully stocked, the people who get all the attention. Well, that's not me, and it's probably not you either. So here we go. We're going to be talking about the Arizona Monster 300. I'm a week and a day out from my finish at the Arizona Monster 300. I did start a blog on Blogger about it, and it has turned into a novel. Being on course for 164 hours and 17 minutes lends itself to a lot of stories, but we're going to try to give you the quick and dirty here of what it was like out there on the Sonora Desert. So if you haven't heard of the Arizona Monster, it is a point-to-point race, brand new this year, the inaugural year. It starts in Superior, Arizona, and goes 309 miles all the way through Tucson down to Patagonia, Arizona, which is about 10 miles from Mexico. It crosses a large section of the Sonora Desert, and it is primarily on the Arizona Trail. It is 86% single track trail. Let's just get into it. So we had a wave start. There was 4 waves, and wave 4 started first at 11 a.m. Wave 3 started second at 12, and then wave 2 started third at 1 p.m. That's when I started. And then the elite wave 1, started fourth at 2 p.m. Now, the staggered start was to try to get all the runners through the super remote aid stations and keep us together as a group so that we could be rescued if necessary. And it also had to do with the amount of runners on the trail at once. There was some local regulations, I believe. Just so you know, all these things on the podcast are obviously my perspective, my opinion. They may or may not be actual facts, but this is my experience. So I started in wave 2, which was third. We never quite figured out how to differentiate, but our wave start was based on our projected time. We left from a ranch, and we went out into the desert on we did a little tiny bit of road, we hit some trail, we crossed the only creek that I ever saw in 300 miles, and I was 5 miles in, and for some reason I decided to stop and filter water just to test her out, and little did I know that would be just about the only water I saw in 309 miles. Then we hit Picket Post, which was the first aid station at mile 6.6, and that seemed really odd to have an aid station so early, but that's because we were going to have the longest section without aid, which was 22.1 or 22.2 to Gila River. And as we left Picket Post, we began to climb and ended up in the most gorgeous valley with these sheer red cliff walls. As we were approaching it, we were in these red rock kind of amphitheaters with giant saguaro, gotta say it with a W, cactus that were, taller than a house. And for me, not being from the desert, the scenery was beyond breathtaking. The trail all in that section to Gila River was super runnable, and we were slowly climbing our way out of this canyon. The sun began to set, and desert sunsets are just unlike anything I've ever experienced. they go on forever, and the red is so intense, it just turns everything red. And also, having so many sheer cliff walls, the echoes were just wonderful. You could hoot and holler and get 3 or 4 repetitions of your voice. And so much fun to be running with everybody. Very unique experience to be able to be passing some of the slower folks who had started 2 hours or an hour earlier, and then also being passed by the first wave, the elite runners. And so, yeah, somewhere in there about mile 30, I started getting passed by the wave 1 elite runners. And I remember doing the math when I got passed by the leader, which I think was Pete. And his time at mile 20 something, he was averaging 8-minute miles. I was like, who on earth goes out at an 8-minute mile on a 300-mile race? But then not too long afterwards, right around the 50K mark, I started getting passed by the rest of wave 1, who was in a large group, and they were all averaging just a little over 10-minute miles. I think that was the first time I stopped to take care of my feet. I had made a really poor shoe choice. I didn't even expect to make it to mile 30 or mile 50 because I had a pretty bad knee injury from February 1st and tried to roll over my registration unsuccessfully and decided I would never pay $2,000 for this race again. So I was going to try it. But yeah, early on, those shoes started tearing up my feet. I got the biggest blister of my life. But into the night, we went out of Gila River and began climbing. I believe the next one was Tortilla. But the climb on paper said it was 1,900 feet, which didn't seem like that big of a deal to me, over 16 miles. The mountain in our town is Mount Sentinel, and it has 1,900 feet of elevation, and I climb it all the time. So over 16 miles, it seemed like no big deal, but in reality, the climb never ended. We were on these micro switchbacks on these very thin knife ridges, and so the switchbacks were only 40, 50, maybe 100 feet long. So there were so many of them. They just kept going up and up and up and up. And then you'd go over another ridge and climb that one. And the climb just seemed to never stop. And as you started talking to people, some people's watches were already breaking 3,000 feet of climbing instead of 1,900. But you could see everyone's headlamps climbing out of this canyon and climbing up and up and up. And you could kind of see how much further you had to climb. I remember this one gentleman had a blinking red light on the back of his, boing, boing, boing. And I was watching him for 3.5 hours trying to catch this guy because he was the only person with the red blinking light. And it was right before the aid station. We finally hit a downhill about 3 miles, and I was able to catch him and meet him. Wonderful gentleman from Australia, Ben, and we ran it in together. It was, yeah, there was actually 12 people from Australia, which I thought was amazing for a race in America on its inaugural year to have 12 Aussies, which I think spoke to the spirit of the race. They were very down to run some desert and just was an amazing time. So, yeah, I think everything kind of started to blend together in the dark. We were trying to push to Freeman aid station at mile 76 and got there, did not sleep, was trying to go for maybe about the first 100 miles without sleeping. And the cactuses just kept getting thicker and thicker and more various. And there had to have been at least 10 species of cacti. I'm not a desert guy, not an expert, but they had told me that the octillo, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, but that it can jump. And there was some argument between the local native Arizonans whether or not it really could, but I will say that I got stabbed by 4 different cactuses, and it did seem like they jumped. The whole arm of the arctio would break off, and the thorns are so deeply embedded, it takes everything you can do, all of your strength to pull one out, and it is extremely painful. I had one go through the sole of my shoe, then through the leather into my foot. And with my trekking pole and all of my strength, I could barely dislodge it. Um, it was the cactuses were hanging over the trail onto the trail. There was chunks of cactus on the trail, cactus arms. I got real paranoid and stared at the trail a lot. Um, that was a crazy experience. How many cactuses there were. Got in and out of Freeman, and then was heading to the aid station. I think it was about mile 93, and I don't know if it was called Black Rock, but I was about 33 hours in, and I got to Black Rock, and I think that's when, some of a little bit of Freeman, but definitely there, you saw the fatigue and the overwhelm of the aid stations and how the wave start had unintentionally obliterated the supplies of the aid stations because it had caused all the runners to show up at one time in this gigantic wave, and they just couldn't keep up. And so that is the first time I started seeing them running out of food. And lucky for me, I was kind of at the back of the middle pack. And so I was right on the cusp of there not being any food. And so when I got there, they were cooking, like second pizzas for the people who'd been there for a while. And I sat down and met some of the runners, met a wonderful lady named Shelby, who was going to move to Whitefish. And we talked about moving to Montana, where I'm from. And they were about to make the very last pizza and give it to somebody who'd already had 2. And I was like, wait, I haven't had one. And luckily I got a pizza with everything on it, which saved my butt for sure. And it was very difficult to leave the warmth of the fire from that aid station, but I wanted to make it close to 100 miles. And I had some sleeping stuff in my drop bag at Tiger Mine. And so I tried to push all the way to Tiger Mine, mile 105, and I just started falling asleep standing up and looking for somewhere to lay down. And there isn't very many flat spots, and there isn't very many spots with no cacti. And so I think as we got down into it, there was some sandy washes where there's just basically dry creek beds with sand. And I did try several of these. The first one, I actually swept the sand kind of smooth and checked it with my headlamp and laid down and immediately got a cactus thorn in my butt. And it was very deep in there. The whole arm of Ocotillo was under the sand. And that took all my strength, and it stretched my butt cheek to its maximum tensile strength before it finally popped out. I didn't get any sleep. I tried 3 separate times. I wasted almost 3 hours trying to sleep and never slept. So I pushed up to Tiger Mine and got there as the sun was rising. And they were running low on food as well. And so another issue that started to come up almost immediately is that if you start in waves and the faster runners start last and everybody gets to the aid station, there's 259 racers started, and each sleep station had, about 4 tents with 4 cots. So 16 beds for 259 people. There was almost never an opening in any of the sleep tents. And then cots were at a limited supply, blankets were at a limited supply, chairs were at a limited supply. Most aid stations, every chair was full, every blanket was in use, and every cot was full. But I did wait until I'd eaten and the sun had risen, and somebody finally opened up a cot. I jumped in there, and since it was daylight and there's a lot of people moving around and noise at the aid station, I luckily, after running the Bigfoot and the Cocodona, had packed eye masks and these wonderful silicone earplugs in every drop bag at every sleep station. And if you get those silicone earplugs really lodged in your ear and that face mask on, it really helps. I also like to try to put on compression socks and elevate my feet while I'm sleeping if possible. And I ended up getting almost 2 hours of decent sleep. So I'm now about 40 hours in with almost 2 hours of sleep. And I rolled out, I felt pretty rejuvenated, and I was going to try to put down another 50 miles that day. So I kept going. That started heating up. I was hoping to make it up Mount Lemon before the heat of the day. And of course, with every climb in this race, it seemed like I got there right as it was going to heat up, 9:30, 10 o'clock. I rolled into the aid station at the bottom of Mount Lemon, and I wish I had my little cheat sheet here with all the names, but I believe it might have started with an O. But that aid station was the best aid station in the whole race, bar none. They had lots of volunteers who were very eager to help you. Up until that point, I had filled all my own water. I had ordered all my own food. I had gone to get the food. I had I had to track down and figure out what the menus were. Everything. I had to go get my own drop bag. It was essentially self-service until that aid station. But that aid station, they were like, "Oh, don't get up. I'll take your order. I'll go get your drop bag. I will fill your water." It was like every other aid station I've ever been at in every other race. And they were joyful. They didn't seem burnt out or over fatigued or overworked. And they made me the most wonderful avocado bacon cheeseburger, and it was like a full half pound. It's the best thing that ever happened. And then I made a joke about if I could have seconds, and they did make me another one, which I ate both of them gladly. I would have actually just stayed at that aid station for the rest of the race, but my wife would have killed me. So I launched into the climb up Mount Lemon as it was getting hot. There was some stock tanks along the way that you could filter water out of. Luckily, I did have a water filter. I rolled out with 3 liters of water, which ended up probably not being quite enough. But the climb up Mount Lemon was long and wasn't really overly hard until towards the end. There was a section that had about 800 feet of gain in 1.3 miles. It was extremely steep, about 600 feet of gain per mile. It was on a little tiny 2-track 4-wheeler road, very bad footing with rocks. But that's kind of my favorite. That's my bread and butter, is climbing. So I kind of fell into it. A lot of people from the Midwest, the Flatlanders, were definitely whining and not excited about it. But there was, little groups. There was a lot of people running together, and I was very much solo. I met some wonderful folks going up. Marion was pacing, a guy, Andrew, who has a podcast, who I'd listened to, and they were extremely friendly and had lots of great stories. And I think that's probably the best part of being in the back of the pack, is when you're slow and you're not worried about your time, you're just trying to finish, you have a lot of time to talk and get to know people. And so we ended up, I think every sunset for this race, I was set up perfectly from a high point to see the most glorious reds, yellows, oranges in these sunsets that just, they were breathtaking. The amount of color involved and just the way it reflects off the desert made the entire race worth it. I'm not even kidding. Like 2.5 hours worth of a sunset. So the sunset up on Mount Lemon what did not disappoint. We got to a wonderful ridge run. Once you did do the climb, there was a couple saddles that we ran through with an extremely runnable trail, and you were on the face of the mountain where you could see the whole city of Tucson and the valley. And yeah, it was probably the most beautiful part of the entire race. I did think that I saw a photographer up on top of a cliff hiding up there, and I was friends with the photographer and stopped and yelled and waved my arms and realized that was actually a mountain lion, not a photographer. It was 200 to 300 yards off trail, so no real danger, but it was the second time in my life I saw a mountain lion. Ended up still being another 3 miles to Mount Lemon, and got up there and got to see my wife and my son, who were my crew, for the first time. And luckily, my wife had just enough room I could kind of curl up in the back of her car, because once again, all the beds, cots, blankets, chairs, everything was full. Luckily, they had a fire pit in addition to their gas fire, because it was snowing off and on, and it was frigid. That was the second aid station that was on a ridge. Tiger Mine was also on a ridge, which makes it really difficult because you can see the aid station for so long before you get there, and it looks like it's right next to you. And it keeps going and going and going, and you're climbing over one ridge and another ridge. Especially at Tiger Mine, I think we crossed 5 or 6 ridges before we finally got to climb up to the aid station. But I got up to Mount Lemon. I think I got one of the last burgers up there. I know that they gave me the end of the tomato, and the next guy who came in got a burger with no veggies, and I had like the butt end of a tomato. I think I got the last veggies there. And so, yeah, lucky for me, like I said, I could kind of curl up in a weird way in my wife's car, and I got my second hour of sleep, maybe an hour and a half. It's hard to really calculate. And I had her wake me up and kick me out of there. I rolled out of there with a cup of coffee and walked a little pavement to get to the next trailhead, and was hoping to make up some time on that descent. And once I got over the ridge and dropped down, I realized immediately that I would make up no time on the descent. It was straight down, no switchbacks, super steep, and fist to head size, not boulders, rocks that were not set in any soil. They were just rolling. So the footing was terrible. This is probably the only time my knee really hurt during the race, miraculously. I don't know how or why, besides it being a miracle that my knee didn't hurt, but I did use my trekking poles to basically lower myself down every step for many miles. And the fatigue really started catching up with me. I ended up taking 4 separate dirt naps. I could not stay awake, but then I also couldn't stay asleep for longer than 15 minutes. I had also, at Mount Lemon, I'd grabbed a little pad. I took a Thermarest Z-fold, I cut it in half, and then I cut probably 4 or 5 inches off the side to make it short enough to fit on the back of my running pack. But I was really paranoid about laying on cactus thorns. So I carried that. It probably weighed 5 or less ounces. I carried that for the remainder of the race and used it like crazy, as well as a sole emergency bivy, but not the 3.5 ounce Mylar one. They have it's probably, it's either 5.6 ounces or 8 ounces, but it's a breathable one where you don't get a bunch of condensation or get your clothes wet in it. That was a lifesaver. So the temperatures up on Mount Lemon were, between 28 and 38. Sleeping in that, soaking wet in sweat, was really difficult. So I had a packable puffy jacket, and I actually got it online from a company called Outdoor Vitals, and it's been the best investment I couldn't believe that I would need one. When I did the Cocodona 250, my friend Todd Bachman said, hey, you need a packable puffy coat with a hood. He's like, that is the go-to for the desert. You're going to be really cold. So glad that he told me. The Outdoor Vitals puffy has pit zips, so you can run in it and not sweat it out. And yeah, it also has a DWR finish, so it does shed some water. But I use that as basically my sleeping bag, the sole bivy to keep me warm. And that mat really saved my ass, literally. Every time I picked it up, it had thorns in it. So those would have been in my behind. Yeah, it was a lot of extra weight. And all the other runners kept asking me if I was a thru hiker because I had so much gear. But I needed to sleep, and I guess I just didn't care. I finally did fall asleep for almost 2 hours twice. So I think after the Mount Lemon section, when I came down to Rito aid station, there was one before that, which I don't really remember, but I think I'd had about 6 hours of sleep. I had hit mile 158, and this is when the shortages and the burnout of the aid stations really became increasingly apparent. I rolled in, and my wife had met me. It was the morning, and they had no more hamburgers, no more hot dish. They just had gels and stuff. And my wife asked for food, and they told her to go to In-N-Out. So it's a good thing she was there. She did go to In-N-Out and got me an amazing hamburger. Yeah, all the sleep stations and chairs were full. I had my wife buy a chair so I'd have a place to sit. The aid station volunteers didn't fill my bladder. They didn't get out of their chairs. They were just burnt out to the max. Like, they didn't give me any food. They didn't give me a Coke. My wife kind of did everything for me. And then that was, my first experience where in this race you were allowed to check out and go to a motel, and so we had an Airbnb. My wife checked me out, and I went and took a shower for the first time during a race. The whole thing felt very much like cheating, but it wasn't, so I was, can't beat him, join him. I remember laying down in the bed at the Airbnb. I think I started crying because it felt so good, and I did not think I would ever get out of bed. I didn't think I could get out of that bed. It was too comfortable. It was dangerously comfortable. But my wife won't let me quit. So she got me up, 2 hours of sleep, probably up to 8 hours at that point, back to Rito, put the tracker back on. Like, they didn't know which tracker was mine. We figured it out, got it all attached, and then I commenced running 38 miles. Well, no, first you have to make it to, I think the next one was Catalina, maybe? Anyway, I went through this wandering flat desert lot with a big bull, huge white bull, the biggest bull that I've ever seen. Luckily, he was laying down when I was there. Just kind of a very meandering course through the hottest, flattest part. And then this was day 3 or 4. This would have been, started on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. This was Monday. And it started approaching 100 or about to break 198 degrees. And when you're on the flat, white desert floor, all the heat is reflecting off the ground. It will sunburn the inside of your nostrils. You got to put sunscreen up your nose, even with a hat on. And the heat was so oppressive. I just almost had zero motivation, contemplated quitting. And I think what I finally did is broke out music for the first time, and then actually settled on just listening to stand-up comedy and laughing. And that distracted me, got me through that section to Catalina. No, actually, no, Catalina's all the way through Tucson. So we hit the, in my opinion, worst part of the race. I didn't really read the description very well. There wasn't that detailed of a description, but part of that single track trail, 86%, is 38 miles of black asphalt paved bike path through Tucson. And I wasn't going to run it in the heat of the day. So I took a nap in the shade. I took 3 short naps in that desert section and then decided to run all night long to get as much of that asphalt done as I could. So I knocked out about 20 miles of it and was really pushing to stay awake. And it was just such a monotony of black asphalt in the dark. And none of the intersections were marked. I mean, there was trails on both sides and bridges and intersections all over the place. I had to look at my watch constantly. I don't know if they weren't allowed to mark it or they just figured it was self-explanatory, but in my mental state, it took a lot of checking. But I did make it through, stayed on course. We were also allowed to go to convenience stores or restaurants. Unfortunately, I'd forgot my debit card, and the only thing I could figure out is if I downloaded the McDonald's app, I could pay online with a saved credit card. So I did find a McDonald's along the way, had an iced coffee and a breakfast sandwich. That was pretty amazing. But then the sun began to come up. Everyone in Tucson definitely thought I was homeless. I was dirty. I was stinky. I had a big beard. I was carrying everything I owned on my back. And I was trying to take naps in the bushes. And the guy who worked at Home Depot decided to leaf blow the whole parking lot. I don't know. I still don't know if he knew I was there under that bush, but he blew all the debris like up over the concrete wall. And I woke up in a shower of leaf fragments and debris and had to evacuate. I also climbed under a bridge into a culvert for some shade and slept in there. And there was people living everywhere, in culverts, in the river bottom, in the ditch, in the bushes. Shade was prime real estate. You had to compete for shade. But I did get a little bit of nap in there and got all the way. Yeah, it gets kind of foggy, but I did get to Catalina, and it was a wonderful aid station. They had pizza. My buddy Scott Princess was running that aid station, and it was very full service. They took care of me. I didn't have to get up and do everything myself, and oh man, it was wonderful. As well as the aid station before Rito, the Rest and Ramen, Carter Williams, I think is his name. He was running that one, and he must have got me 4 or 5 Cokes with ice. He was my favorite person at that point. And I think three servings of ramen with potato chips, which I would suggest putting the potato chips in the ramen. It's just better, saltier. That was the Carter Williams special. Yeah, so rolling out of Catalina, another 6-7 miles of pavement. Then you hit another one of these flat, meandering desert sections that we were running, some mountain bike path, lots of cactus. Just enough vegetation you can't see where you're going. Feels like you're running in circles. Super hot. Seems like a total pointless waste of running around in the weirdest pattern possible. And that was to Valencia. Valencia, they were, they still had food. They were kind of well stocked. They were running out of shade. We had to move everything because the sun was shining under their canopy. Was going to originally sleep there, but then with moving everything out of the sleep station, it just wasn't happening. So I decided to roll out and take a dirt nap somewhere once the sun went down. And we finally left Tucson behind and started to climb. This is on the way to Gabe Zimmerman. The vegetation and the topography totally changed. We were in these little shrubs that were 3 or 4 feet tall. They had no leaves. They created almost zero shade. There was really nowhere to lay down in the shade unless there was a huge prickly pear cactus, an occasional juniper. And so I did spend several hours at a time just looking for 6 feet of shade. Even if it was only a foot wide, I wanted 6 full feet of shade where I could get my whole body in the shade. I figured out pretty early on, if your feet or head are out of the shade, it's not good. You don't want to sleep with part of yourself in the sun. So I think I got a little nap here or there, maybe a half hour cumulative. So I think I was up to 8.5 hours of sleep and was rolling into day 5. Got to Gabe Zimmerman, met my wife there. That was a long, arduous, twisty, turny journey. And the other funny thing that kept happening is every time I hit the best shade and the only water on the course, like the little river that we crossed going into Gabe Zimmerman, it was always night and cold. So the shade, the trees, it smelled good. It felt good, the cool breeze. But they did have that section marked tremendously well. In this really twisty, turny river bottom, they used lighted different sticks and poles and had like flashing lights and Christmas lights. Without all that, I don't think I would have made it out of that river canyon because it was very confusing. But luckily, they had marked everything just stupendously up to Gabe Zimmerman. Got there and ended up getting their last breakfast burrito. Like, I just avoided that total food shortage the whole race. And my wife was there, so even though the sleep stations were full again, I was able to sleep in the back of her car, and she had devised a way to make more room so I could stretch out. I think that was the best sleep I got. It was another hour and 40 minutes, almost 2 hours. And with the burrito and the sleep, I felt pretty good and rolled out. Now, everything from Gabe Zimmerman to Apache Springs starts to turn into a mental mush. All I know is that I was trying to make it to Apache Springs well before 11:30 so that I could do the climb before the heat of the day coming out of Apache Springs. And I was running through the night trying to get some dirt naps, falling asleep standing up, but not able to stay asleep for longer than 15 minutes. I do have a video somewhere in there. I started having waking dreams and falling asleep while I was talking, while I was videoing. I had this dream that, and I was convinced this was true and texted my friend, but I told my friend, hey, they started breeding these pygmy squirrels that you can buy and carry in your running pack, and they're specially bred to eat dead skin so that you don't have to pop your blisters, so they eat all the dead skin off your feet. It's like a new thing. I remember I said, hey, my friend Neil from South Dakota just told me. I don't have a friend named Neil. I don't even know anyone from South Dakota. That was my reality right there, that I was going to buy a pygmy squirrel to eat dead skin off my feet. So I was not doing too hot. I forget the name of the aid station before Apache Springs, but I do know that section was 15.5 miles without a refill. And, it was, it's almost coming to me. It was like cabins. It was down in a bottom. It had a name like Little Texas or Little Arizona or something. It had an outhouse. I remember that. It'll come to me. But anyway, that 15-mile section I filled up. I had the 3 liters and there were stock tanks. I ended up drinking 4.5 liters of water in that section and dunking my head in the stock tanks, getting my shirt wet, my hat wet. And I was still overheating. It was super hot. I was going to break 102 that day. And the sleep deprivation caught up with me, and I started to hallucinate. I saw my son, my 8-year-old son, walking through the desert without a shirt or hat on, followed him off course into the bushes. Luckily, I had enough presence of mind to know that I was losing my mind and called or texted my wife and told her I was going to go lay down and told her to call me in a half hour. I went into the bushes, ended up passing out into a very large bush into the shade, and was unconscious for 79 minutes. My wife called me 6 times. I never woke up, and I woke up in a pool of my drool and mucus. I'm very fortunate that I was in the shade. But while I was passed out, I had a dream that I died. And when I woke up, I thought I was dead. And it freaked me out super bad. I was just beside myself, scared out of my mind, and got up and started pushing to Apache Springs. And at that point, I became extremely belligerent and angry and rolled into Apache Springs aid station, screaming and cussing and throw my trekking poles and yelled, "This is suicide. I am done." The Arizona Monster had completely mentally and emotionally broke me. I was done not only with the race, but with running. I was never going to run again. It was not worth it. But, nobody would accept my drop. The entire aid station staff, the medic, the sweeper, my friend Helgi all said, "You're not going to drop. You're going to make it." And I got pretty angry and argued with them and got on Starlink and called my wife, and she told me, "You're not going to drop. You're going to finish. Like, you can do it. You're not going to die." And I just kept telling everybody, "I'm going to die. I won't go out there." And that was one of my things. I said, "I demand a water drop, like 22 miles. The next section was 22 miles, and it was going to be even hotter. So I was like, there has to be a water drop. This is suicide. You're going to kill me." And they're like, "Well, sit down, calm down." They were very gracious, and they said, "There is a water drop. We put a water drop out there at 10.5 miles. And so I still wouldn't calm down. I said, "I need exact GPS coordinates. I need to know how many gallons there are. I need to know how many runners have passed it." And I got back on the Starlink. I emailed the race director. I emailed, Candace and Garrett, and everybody was very gracious. Everybody realized that I had lost my mind, that I was totally out of it, and they called me, and then they texted me the GPS coordinates of the water, confirmed that there was water there, and the aid station staff scrounged up a couple extra bottles so that I could carry more water. And I think it was Danny Westergaard, one of the oldest runners in the race. I remember he told me, "Stand up, let me have a look at you." And he was like, "Yeah, you're fine, you'll make it." And he's finished Badwater so many times. And I asked him, "How do you know?" And he's like, "I've seen so many people do this." He's like, "You're moving good. I'll go out with you." My friend Helgi woke up from his nap and announced to the aid station, "Tom's not going to drop. He likes to cry a lot, but he never gives up." My wife told me, "I know you're scared. Just do it scared." And so I rolled out of Apache Springs. I waited the full 3 hours. I was second to last or third to last. I was doing the math. I wanted the sun to go down right as I was getting to the water drop. And so I rolled out of there with 5 liters of water. I think my pack was 20 pounds. And I proceeded to drink all that water. And ironically, didn't end up needing the water drop. I got there and I still had 2.5 liters. And the sun was going down, and we started the climb. And it was long. It just seemed like it never ended, weaving in and out of these canyons. But I think I got one decent dirt nap there. I had tried to sleep the whole time at Apache Springs and gotten no sleep. I could not sleep. So yeah, I'm probably 9 hours of sleep for 5.5 days coming into day 6 in that climb. And the sun was going down. And the other thing besides the sunsets that made the race worth it is the stars in the desert are just unreal. They're off the charts. They're so bright and luminous. They all look like planets. They're stars that I've never seen in my life, even in living in Montana. They're stars inside of the constellations I've never seen. And to top it off, that night was a full moon. It was the brightest, yellowest, golden moon I've ever seen. And once we finally finished the climb and started the descent, It was bright enough, I turned my headlamp off, and miraculously, after eating so much food, I was trying to eat 300 calories an hour, alternating between gels and stroop waffles, plus the aid station food and cold soaked ramen noodles. And drinking the 5 liters of water, my body finally started to recover on the move, and I was able to run the 12 to 15 miles down to one of the final aid stations. The name is slipping my mind. But that was one of the best runs of my entire life. Definitely one of the best night runs with the stars, with some friends, Helgi up there, and hooting and hollering and the echoes. And we did turn on some music, which I know is controversial, but we were having a little downhill running rave. And we had climbed so long to get out of there, and we were so ready to be done with all pavement. Once we hit that trail, it is this wonderful meandering. When it's on the downhill, it seems great, but it's like 270-degree switchbacks, like these alternating horseshoes around the edges of these ridges. So in Arizona, with those washes being so steep, the trails don't go down and back out. It's like they hug the ridge, and the ridges are just so varied. You can see your friends and other headlamps across these canyons, and had the best downhill running grade of the whole race. It was just seemed super buttery and wonderful. Couldn't believe that I had just thought I was going to die, that I just tried to drop the race for 2 hours. It was unbelievable. Rolled into that final aid station where I met my wife, got another hour and a half of sleep, and went into the last 30 miles. No, I'm trying to remember if my wife was there or not. That's a good question. Casablanca, that's where it was, and she was there. And got some food. I think by that time, after Gabe Zimmerman, all the aid stations, I think, had resupplied. They had, sent the director out to get more food or something, because at that point, every aid station was fully stocked with what it said it was. They had hot food. Seems like the volunteers got a little relief. The runners got more spread out, so there wasn't this giant wave to overwhelm them. And yeah, I had great experiences at all those aid stations. Like, no problems. They had gels, they had everything. And so I rolled out and was able to push through and make up a ton of time. I was passing people on the uphill. I think I passed 12 people. And I went from being, 20 minutes from the cutoff to finishing almost 6 hours in front of the cutoff. There was one last never-ending climb before the final descent. And there was some more greenery, some actual trees eventually. But yeah, it's a lot of hot, dry, open country with zero shade. I don't think I slept at all until the end, and I was able to jog it in. And my wife and son were there waiting, and my friend Anastasia was taking pictures, and I got my buckle and handshakes from everybody who was there. I was so out of it, I can't tell you who was there. I remember somebody commenting about whether the race director gave you your buckle or gave you a hug or something, and I couldn't have cared less. All I wanted to do was be done. And I do know they cooked me a huge everything pizza, and at the same time, the other people who were making breakfast made me a gigantic breakfast with these like hush puppy kind of apple fritter things that you dipped in syrup and bacon and eggs. And both of the plates were overflowing, and I gladly ate both of them sitting in the shade, and couldn't believe I made it. And with a knee injury and taking so long. But I guess the takeaway is you can't do it alone. You need other people, the aid station people, your friends, people you've never met on the trail side. And you need people to tell you that you can do it, because you don't know you. You don't know you as well as other people do. Sometimes you forget who you are. And yeah, it was just a great community of people, the runners, the volunteers, everybody was so helpful. 90% of people were just overjoyed to be helping. And it was a team effort. It was just one big team effort. I don't know if I would do it again since I've already done it. I keep saying it would be a great 150-mile race. The first 150 miles was magic. The 38 miles of bike path was torturous. The hot, flat desert was a test of my will. Like I said, it broke me. I would suggest the race to anybody. Any skill level, either. I mean, yeah, like it is a journey and you can figure out who you are. So there you go. Arizona Monster, inaugural year 2025. Peace out. That was a horrible peace. There's your peace out. Peace. Dum, dum, dum.